The curious beginner. Every bassist starts here before the calluses, before the gear, before you even know what a root note is. You're watching a band or scrolling YouTube, and your eyes drift off the guitarist and onto the guy in the back doing what exactly? You can't always hear it clearly, but you feel it. That low end is what makes you nod your head without noticing. That's the hook. That's what pulls people like Paul McCartney, Bootsy Collins, and Geddy Lee into picking up 4 strings instead of 6 in the first place. Many of the best bassists in history came in as curious outsiders, not trained musicians chasing scales. At this stage, you're not thinking about technique or theory. You're borrowing a friend's bass, or eyeing a cheap starter pack online, unsure if your hands are even big enough for it. Which is why beginners with smaller hands often gravitate towards short-scale basses without knowing that's what they're doing. You're not sure if bass is easier than guitar, or genuinely harder in disguise. You just know something about that instrument feels different from everything else in the band, and you want to find out why. The first bass. Eventually, curiosity turns into a purchase, and this is where things get real. Budget usually decides everything. Most beginners land somewhere under $250, often in a starter bundle with an amp, cable, and a strap thrown in. Size matters more than people expect too. Smaller hands often do better on a short-scale neck, something like a Squier or Mustang bass. Before ever touching a full 34-inch scale. Then comes the unglamorous essentials nobody warns you about. A strap, and strap locks, because your bass will slide off your shoulder and hit the floor at least once. A tuner, and finally an amp, because playing unplugged for weeks hides just how sloppy your technique actually is. If it's used, the strings are probably older than the bass looks, and fresh ones make a bigger difference than most beginners assume. This is also the phase of learning where your fingers actually live root notes. The 1 and the 5, played along to songs you already love, badly, on repeat, until it stops sounding wrong. The root note survivor. For a while, all you play is root notes. That's the one note a chord gets its name from. A G chord, you play G, over and over. And for a long time, that's basically the whole job. Punk songs, easy pop tunes, church gigs, most of it doesn't ask for much more than that. At first it feels boring, like you're not really playing yet. But then you notice something. Locking tight with a kick drum, leaving space instead of filling every beat, can make a simple root line groove way harder than something flashy. Jamerson built entire Motown classics mostly on roots and rhythm. And people still can't stop moving to them. Eventually, you start adding little things without even planning to. A fifth here, an octave jump there, just to keep it interesting. Nobody teaches you this part. You just start reaching for more because plain roots stop feeling like enough. The Flea phase. Many players believe Flea is the reason bass even entered the picture. Watching Red Hot Chili Peppers, you notice the guy jumping around, slapping his strings raw, somehow still locked in with the drummer the whole time. That's the gateway. So you start chasing it. Aggressive slap and pop technique, hitting the strings harder than feels natural, boosting the mids and highs while dialing back a little in between. Maybe adding a compressor to get that snap. Gear starts creeping into the picture too. A big muff for grit. A Qtron for that funky filter sweep. Maybe a bass synth pedal once you go down the rabbit hole of his rig. You're not just learning his notes anymore, you're chasing tone. Then your hands start hurting. Because slapping that hard for that long takes actual conditioning, not just enthusiasm. This is usually when technique either gets fixed or gets injured. Eventually, the flash starts mattering less. You notice Flea leaves space too. That the silence between his notes carries as much weight as the slaps themselves. The phase doesn't really end so much as it settles, from copying his moves to understanding why he made them. The slap phase. Once the thumb and pluck bug bites, it's hard to think about anything else. Thump the E and A strings against the fretboard with the side of your thumb. Hook the first finger under the D or G string and snap it back. And suddenly, you're making percussion out of a bass line. Larry Graham started this whole language. Flea kept it visible. and now it's the first thing half the internet wants to see a bassist do. The problem is, it's easy to slap everything, whether the song calls for it or not. People online call it stunt bass for a reason. Flashy, technically impressive, sometimes completely wrong for the music underneath it. New players especially tend to reach for slap before locking down fundamentals. And it shows. The ones who actually sound good with it treat slap like texture, not a personality. Larry Graham and Flea didn't slap constantly. They used it when it made the band sound better, then pulled back. That's usually the lesson this phase eventually teaches, whether you're ready to hear it or not. The "I'm basically Victor Wooten" phase. Somewhere after slap starts feeling normal, someone shows you a Victor Wooten video and the whole ceiling of what's possible on 4 strings disappears. Double thumbing, tapping with both hands, harmonics popping out of nowhere, all while somehow keeping a groove going underneath. It looks less like bass playing and more like a magic trick nobody explained to you. So you chase it. Double thumb technique becomes the new obsession. Tapping exercises eat up your practice time, and you start watching Flecktones clips on loop. Trying to figure out how one person makes a bass sound like 3 instruments at once. Wooten's whole career came out of growing up in a family band, learning from his brothers before he was even old enough to understand what he was doing, then landing with Bella Fleck and blending bluegrass, funk, and jazz into something that didn't have a real name yet. The irony most people run into eventually is that Wooten himself talks more about listening and groove than technique. 5 Grammys in, and his actual teaching leans toward feel and communication over flash. So the rabbit hole tends to end the same way it does with most virtuoso obsessions. You come out the other side playing less, but meaning more of it. The Cliff Burton phase. At some point you hear Orion or Anesthesia pulling teeth, and realize bass and metal doesn't have to sit quietly under the guitars. Cliff Burton treated it like a lead instrument, running fuzz and wah through a Rickenbacker 4001 until it screamed, almost like a guitar itself. And that changes what you think the instrument is for. So you go hunting for that tone. A fuzz pedal, maybe a wah, rolled off just enough so it stays round instead of turning into pure noise. Since Burton's grit never lost its low end, light gauge strings helped too. He played on a relatively thin set, which made faster runs easier to pull off without fighting the instrument. Then comes the actual technique grind. Building right-hand speed takes patience. Starting slow and adding short bursts at a time so your hands don't cramp up from tension. Songs like The Four Horsemen become practice material. Along with older influences he pulled from Geezer Butler, Stanley Clarke, players who treated bass as more than background. What sticks with most people, though, is that Burton died at 24, 4 years into Metallica's run, which means everything he left behind still feels unfinished, like a phase in bass history that ended before it fully arrived. The guitar phase. Along the way, curiosity pulls you toward 6 strings instead of 4. Since the lowest 4 strings on a guitar match a bass note for note, just an octave higher, picking one up doesn't feel like starting over, it feels like seeing the same map from a different angle. Chords start making sense. Suddenly, you can hear what a song actually sounds like fully built, not just the low end holding it together. This is where things click differently. You start noticing how rhythm parts lock with drums, how melody sits above the groove, how a bass line decides to work with a chord progression instead of just anchoring it. Some players call it a bass curious phase running in reverse. The bass player wanting to understand the whole picture instead of just the foundation. Most people don't stay guitarists. They come back to bass with better instincts, more aware of space, of when to play a root and when to let a note breathe, of how their part fits into something bigger than itself. Dan Briggs writes on guitar and takes the ideas back to bass. It ends up less like switching lanes and more like borrowing a different set of eyes for the same song. The music theory phase. Playing by feel only gets you so far, and eventually you start wondering why some notes sound right and others don't. That's when scales stop being something you just practice, and start becoming something you actually understand. The major scale comes first for most people. That whole, whole, half, whole, half pattern that gives you that bright, happy sound. Then the minor scale, darker and sadder. The one you hear all over blues and jazz. From there, it's chord tones. Root, third, fifth. Learning that a C major chord is just C, E, and G stacked together changes how you look at the neck entirely. Suddenly, a bass line isn't guesswork. It's outlining the harmony underneath the song. The first, fourth, fifth progression becomes second nature, since half of popular music leans on it one form or another. Books like Ed Friedland's Walking Bass Material start showing up on your shelf. Sites like StudyBass or MusicTheory.net become regular tabs open in your browser. And somewhere in the middle of all this, most people realize theory isn't something you finish. It's something that keeps unfolding a little more every time you pick the instrument back up. You can still play well without any of it, but once the ceiling theory becomes visible, it's hard to unsee. Hearing yourself recorded for the first time. Nothing humbles a bassist quite like pressing record and playing something back. In your head, everything felt locked in. The playback reveals notes ringing out that should have been muted. Timing that drifts just enough to notice. Dynamics all over the place. Tape doesn't lie, and it doesn't care how good the take felt in the moment. Part of this comes down to physics, not just skill. Bass carries so much low and information that your brain processes it differently live than it does through a phone speaker or a pair of headphones. Even Steve Harris's isolated bass tracks sound messier than expected. Once every other instrument gets stripped away, which says something about how forgiving a full mix actually is. Old strings make everything sound duller too, and a phone mic was never built to capture low frequencies properly in the first place, so some of that harshness isn't even about your playing. Still, the discomfort does something useful. Most players who stick with the instrument start doing this on purpose, recording regularly, wincing at the parts that expose bad habits, adjusting muting and note length until the next take actually holds up.